Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to keep working with the server and app that we've been building this whole time. This movie and TV show backend with the whole React front end going on here. We're going to leave React now and go back to servers for the rest of this and talk about a few more things in Express that are going to be helpful for us going forward, not only through the rest of this course, but when you move on to actually implementing a database, some nice way to handle some issues that will come up as soon as we add in that piece. So this episode is going to be talking about error handling. Now, with the routes that we've been building, specifically the movie router, I'll come here as we've done them all, there's really no places where errors are being thrown because we're not interacting with a database. Fortunately for us, when we interact with a database, if something goes wrong, it'll give us an error and let us know why. Right now, though, we're just writing plain JavaScript, and we kind of just have to infer what's an error and what isn't. So we're going to add in some error handling, show you kind of why we'll need it, and build an example or two to prove it. Okay. So error handling in Express can be handled in a very elegant way, and it has to do with middleware. So as you recall, app.use is the middleware function that Express gives us to use our own middleware, our own functionality if we need. But there's one more use of this function we've yet to cover. So we're going to build our own custom error handling middleware that handles errors regardless of where they occur in our routes. With Express, we can set this up using app.use, and a nice place to put it is right here before the app.listen. Technically, one of the last pieces of middleware we'll have in our server.js file. If anything happens in either of these routes that causes an error, we'll throw it and we'll catch it here and handle it, so it doesn't just hit the end of our file and crash our server, which is a node convention. We don't want an error to crash our server. We'd rather be let known about it. All right, so how do we build this? Well, like I said, we are going to use the app.use function. So I'm going to say app.use. Now, to tell Express that this is specifically for error handling, there's actually 4 arguments we need to pass in. If you recall, every middleware callback function that we write, such as this, receives 3 parameters, or 3 arguments in this case, where we get the request object, we get the response object, and we get the next function in case we need to move on to something after this. Well, there's one more that we can actually place here at the beginning, and it makes this middleware specifically for error handling. So what we expect as our first argument for error handling is an error, which I'll hyphenate as ERR. All right, and that's all we got to do. You got to remember these 4 arguments in this specific order, but as soon as we do this, this is specifically for error handling. So we're going to console.log the error for now, and we'll build a little bit more into this in a moment. Well, let's talk about what constitutes an error when it comes to backend programming. If we go to our movie router, let's focus on this get one route that we worked on. If you remember, we are sending the movie ID as a parameter. So we're selecting that ID, and then we're doing a .find on our array of movies to return the singular object of the ID that we're sending as a parameter, and then we're just sending that movie back. But what if there is something wrong? What if the ID is mutated? What if the ID doesn't correspond with something in the database? Something on the front end happened that mutated the data so that the ID doesn't actually even exist. Well, that causes an error here. Let's prove that point really quick by doing a request to this endpoint with an ID that doesn't exist. So I'm going to start up my server. All right, and we're going to do a get request and just place some random ID here and see what we actually get sent back. So localhost 9000 /movies / some ID that doesn't exist. All right, and we'll do a get request. All right, this is an issue. Postman's not making it look like an error because nothing's showing up. But my question is, when we do a .find on an array of movies, if that ID doesn't exist, what does a .find actually return if it doesn't find anything? And the answer is undefined. So I'm going to console log found movie here, and we're going to run that get request one more time. So I'll hit send. We'll come back, And notice I get an undefined error. Well, not an error in this case, just an undefined. But that is a very typical thing that went wrong. We didn't find what we were looking for because we gave our endpoint bad data. So for our intents and purposes in learning Express error handling, we're going to call this an error. If found movie is undefined, that's an error, and we don't want just an empty message. Instead, it would be a lot nicer if we got an object back still, but instead of containing our data contained something like an error message that let us know, hey, the thing you were looking for, we couldn't find it by the ID you gave us. So let's build that ourselves. We're going to do a little if statement right here, kind of our own little custom error checker. We're going to ask if found movie. And that's all I need to say, because found movie, if it finds one, that's going to be a truthy value. It's going to be an object. But if it doesn't find one, this is going to be undefined, which is a falsy value. So if we did not find a movie, if this is a falsy value, that is an error. So what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to create our own error object. So I'm going to say const error equals a new error. And this is a native JavaScript constructor. We can create our own error objects. And whatever we put inside of the parentheses here, if it's a string, that will be our error's message. So I'm going to say the message, the item was not found. All right, so maybe we could be more specific than that, but this is just to get us started here. All right, and this is what we want to send back. Now, I could just say res.send error, but as you recall, we are building an error handler for all errors in one place in our server file. Because if we didn't do this, we would have to repeat that code for every error in every route that ever occurred, which is not dry. So let's keep this dry. Let's handle all of our errors in one place. Well, how do I get data from this route over to this error handler? Right now we're stuck in this file. We needed to get out of that file, come down, and catch the error here. Well, that is where our next keyword comes into play. So this route, it is middleware, so I receive the request and response. I'm also going to receive the next function. Instead of just res.sending the error, I'm going to say next error. What this will do is say call the next middleware in line, and since we're passing an error, it won't correspond to any other routes. It'll keep reading down, and then once it hits this will get triggered. Our middleware here will notice that the next function is carrying an error, and will catch it as this first argument and console log it for us. One last thing we need to do here, this is JavaScript, so even though we're calling next and our middleware will be res.sending eventually, that won't end the server process, and this would still be read. So I want to say return next error. So it doesn't read this line as well. All right. So we're still not going to get a response from our server in Postman because we're not sending anything here, but let's look at what this error looks like and see if we're catching it. So I'll come back and I'll do a request to an ID that doesn't exist. All right, so that's just going to pen, but if we come back, all right, here is the error object. I'm going to open this up, scroll to the top, and notice error, the item was not found. Where did that message come from? Well, if you recall, when I created the error here, that is the message I gave it. So it didn't find a movie, it created the error object, and then it said return next with the error. That passed it all the way to our error handler that console logged it. This is awesome, because we may have 100 routes that could have 100 different things go wrong. Regardless of where they go wrong, the error object will end up in this function. So we can do whatever we would like with it. And the main reason I want to even create this error handler in the first place is so that every error that makes it to the front end has the same shape. I know what I'm expecting. I know what each error is going to be called. So after I console log the error, I'm going to return res.send an object. The object is going to have a key, and you can choose what this is. I'm going to say error message, and it's going to be equal to the error's message, so err.message. Okay, now we're res.sending. So let's make this error get caused again, and see what we get sent back to Postman. So I'll go ahead and send. There we go. Way better than a plain white screen. I think you'd agree. This is way more descriptive and lets us know what happened. And notice the key error message. This is very nice. Because I said call every error message like this, regardless of where an error occurs in my routes, it'll make it to the front end like this. So I'll always have an error message that's letting me know what it is. If we're visualizing here on the front end for a moment, actually we have a front end, so we don't need to visualize. Let's go to our app component. And let's say this error happened here. Where are we going to receive that error? Right, so this is going to come in through the .catch. And the way that I would see that error, I would say console.log, the error response.data.error message. This being whatever I called it in that error handler on my server. Right here. Perfect. Okay, so we did have to make this up a little bit because again, we're not using databases yet. But I just wanted to show you, this would technically constitute an error or some sort of fault in our programming. The thing that we're making a GET request to, so the ID we're sending to doesn't actually exist. And we'd like to be let known about it. So we're checking before we just send back the found movie. We're like, wait, did you actually find the movie? If not, create an error object, give it a message. And we can make this even more descriptive. We could say with backticks, the item with ID, movie ID, was not found. And then we're passing that error to our error handler on our server. That will console log it so we can see it down here, and then send it to the front end so we can see it on the front end as well. So let's try that one more time and see the message. I'm going to put another random ID in here, random ID, and hit send. And it now says the item with ID, random ID, was not found. Perfect. So you can get some practice with this. You can look at these other endpoints and see maybe possibilities where an error could occur. For example, if we're searching by genre, what if they forget to give us a genre in the query string? So here I could ask if there is not a genre, maybe that's an error. So let's make a new error. Const error equals a new error. You must provide a genre. And then we can return next with that error, as long as we're passing next into our route. And now our genre endpoint also has an error handler letting the user know that, hey, you forgot to provide a genre. Next time you request, provide a genre. Now this error, since it's going to be received in the .catch on our front end, we could save this in state and display it like in a little pop-up modal. It's a message from the back end, just like the data from the back end. Let's test this genre route out just to get the practice. So I'm going to come back here and say movies/search/genre, but I'm not going to give a genre. And let's do a GET request. All right, you must provide a genre. All right, I'll provide one. I'll say genre equals fantasy. And now, since I provided one, I'm not getting the error message, I'm getting the data. Way more descriptive for both you and the person experiencing your application. All right, so this is expected going forward. Every server you write, make sure to include this global error handler for your entire server. A good place to put it, again, is right above your app.listen, so it will catch any error thrown in any route, log it, and send it to the front end with the same shape as every other error. All right, implement this. Think about what other routes in what you're working on may constitute an error. Add in your own custom error handling. So get some practice with that. When you're ready, let's move on.